What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by our good friends from Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Dan here with you as always, and this is a fun episode. We're going to talk some Pro Football Hall of Fame because I think some Packers fans are kind of forgetting about this, but this could be a big weekend for Packers history because it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame class, and Sterling Sharpe and Mike Holmgren could finally get in the Hall of Fame this weekend. I make the case for both of them a little bit later on. Myles Garrett wants out. He wants out of Cleveland. Should the Packers try to trade for him? And if it costs 2 first-round picks, would you do that deal? We talk about that as well. Speaking of trades, that's where we're going to lead it off because I had this idea to do the top or the best and the worst Wisconsin sports trades of all time. And the reason I was thinking about this was the Luka and Anthony Davis trade that blew up the sports world over the weekend. So let's jump into that. What are some of the best and what are some of the worst trades in Wisconsin sports history? I mean, you can Google it and you're probably going to find blogs and lists and articles all across the board, whether it's just Brewers, whether it's just Packers, whether it's just Bucks. But if we combined them all, and we made up our own list here, what would be the, and I'm going to say top 5. And I know Brandon's not here for us to do a top 5, but top 5 best Wisconsin sports trades of all time, top 5 worst Wisconsin sports trades of all time. So I will say I've got my list. And I'll start it off with the best because the best I have an honorable mention. Now, I did have a few more honorable mentions on there, but I took them off and just left them off to just one honorable mention. But I'll throw the ones in there that I did consider. I did consider Ahman Green. He was on the short list with the Packers acquiring Ahman Green. I mean, that worked out pretty darn well for Green Bay, sending, was it corner Fred Vincent in a draft pick for Green, who had a pretty darn good career in Green Bay. So he was in consideration. I know it's early, but I did slightly consider the move up in the draft to get Jordan Love. I did slightly consider that. It's not an honorable mention. I'm just saying the thought crossed my mind. My honorable mention, though, I left it down. And honestly, if I could easily flip-flop number 5 in my honorable mention here. And it's that close for me between these two. But I guess I went with number 5. I went with my number 5 because I was around during that time. But my honorable mention is the Big O, Oscar Robertson getting traded to the Milwaukee Bucks. And you had that, pairing with him and Kareem and such, and we know the Big O, one of the best players in Bucks history and such, but prior to that 1970 season, he got traded from the Royals to the Milwaukee Bucks for Flynn Robinson and Charlie Polk. So obviously that was a trade that worked out really well for the Milwaukee Bucks. So that's my honorable mention, but easily could be at number 5 because my number 5, I'm going with the Bucks trading for Drew Holiday. Now, we know Giannis. Oh, I should mention, too, another person I did think of just because I mentioned Bucks. I'm going back. Another person or another trade that I did consider was Chris Middleton trade slightly because, I mean, when he was acquired from Detroit, nobody really thought too much of it, and he's carved out a nice career. Say what you want about, the last couple of years. Chris Middleton has carved out a nice career for the Bucks, with the Bucks too. But number 5, I went with Drew Holiday because to me that was the missing piece and ultimately helped lead the Bucks to a world championship a few years ago. I mean, we talked about it with Groundhog's Day and plays that kind of live in your mind on loop, and one of them is Drew Holiday for me, stealing the ball from Booker, going down the court in the alley-oop to Giannis in the NBA Finals. I mean, it's that play and Giannis's block that are the plays that highlight that NBA Finals. So the fact that, and remember too, the Bucks had Eric Bledsoe, and they re-signed Eric Bledsoe and thought, okay, there's your point, but it really wasn't working out. So what do? They acquired Drew Holiday and bring in his defensive mindness and his toughness and his ability. And I think there's still quite a few Bucks fans out there that wish Drew Holiday would still be on his team and maybe not Damian Lillard. But number 5 to me is getting Drew Holiday, because I think that was the move that ultimately helped get the Bucks over the top and to an NBA championship. Number 4, now I will say these next two were a little bit outside of my lifetime, but no doubt they were huge impacts for these teams. So number 4 to me is when the Brewers acquired Don Sutton from the Houston Astros in 1982. Might have been, a little bit short-lived there in 82, but he was a key player in that American League Championship team. I mean, you're talking about a Hall of Fame career and such. So, but, a lot of times when we see these trades for teams competing for championships, trying to compete for championships, trying to get in the postseason and such, you make these type of moves that elevate them to that level, to get over that hump and such. But, Sutton went 4-1 and 7 regular season starts for the Brewers. Made 3 starts in the postseason for the Brewers. Was a little bit of a short stint there, but given everything with 82 and such, I think you got to put Sutton on that list at number 4. And above them at number 3, we're going to go back to 1980 when the Brewers acquired Raleigh Fingers, Ted Simmons, Pete Vukovich. I mean, you're talking about some key players in franchise history for the Milwaukee Brewers. And to get those 3 in exchange for a package that included David Green, David LaPointe, Larry Sorensen, etc. I mean, I think that one worked out pretty darn well for the Brewers to acquire those 3 guys. 3 guys that long-time Brewers fans still talk about, still remember. When we do all-time Brewers lists, those 3 are sometimes mentioned in there, especially Raleigh Fingers. Ted Simmons in there too, Pete for a little bit. Remember when we did like the underrated Brewers list? Yeah, Ted and Pete were listed on there. So that's my number 3 best trade in Wisconsin sports history. Number 2, staying with the Brewers. I'm staying with the Brewers, and we were talking about this guy not that long ago because he just got inducted in the Hall of Fame, CC Sabathia. Again, short stint with the Brewers, but what he meant to that team during his stint with the Brewers, I think the Brewers are still reeling in the effects from that trade. That trade for CC, I think, really changed things, and it still has an effect on the franchise today, to this day. Brewers were just trying to get over that hump to get into the postseason. And they make a move to acquire a guy like CC Sabathia. The Brewers don't make moves like that. They don't make trades like that. Well, they did. And CC rewarded them by carrying that team on his back to the postseason. And since then, I mean, that was the first time I ever experienced Brewers postseason play. And since then, I mean, the Brewers have been practically perennial contenders to make the postseason. So I think that move alone, when we got a taste of the postseason, we got a taste of the playoffs, that's a move that still affects this franchise to this day. So that was a huge win, a huge trade for that franchise, for that fan base. Number 1, though, a lot of people have already mentioned this one, but the best trade to me in Wisconsin sports history is Brett Favre. We all know the story. This is a story that will be told for years to come. It already is. Ron Wolf comes in. Ron Wolf liked Favre when he was with the Jets, wanted the Jets to get him, and didn't get him. So what does he do, after he comes to Green Bay? Sends a first-round pick to get Favre, and already everybody's on Ron Wolf's case, and what are you doing? Why are you trading the 17th overall pick to a guy who was drafted with like the first pick in the second round of the previous draft and wasn't even a starter, third depth chart Atlanta. What are you doing, Wolf? It worked out. And, you could add more, lore to the trade. Favre failing his physical. Wolf saying, no, pass him, overruled it. There's so many. And then, as they say, the rest is history. So, to me, the number one trade in Wisconsin sports history is acquiring Brett Favre. Now to the worst Wisconsin sports trades of all time, in my opinion. I didn't have an honorable mention for this one. But I'll start it off with number 5. You can call it a little bit recency effect or such. And I get it. The guy was probably going to get traded at the end of the season, but at that point in time in the season, do you make that move? Probably not. It's the Josh Hader trade. Trading Josh Hader when you're first in the division, you're competing for the postseason, and you trade Josh Hader, and your season in that second half fell apart, and you missed the postseason. That Josh Hader trade, again, I think a lot of us okay, it's going to happen, but we were thinking, would it happen in the offseason or something like that, but not during a playoff chase. And we have heard, from players, from counsel back then, how it affected the locker room. It's clear. The proof is there. So to me, given the fact of the point in time of the season, of where the season was and the move that was made, the Josh Hader trade is one of the worst trades in Wisconsin sports history. I'm staying with the Brewers for my number 4. I'm going to go back to 2006. 2006, when the Brewers traded Carlos Lee and at that point a prospect named Nelson Cruz, who ended up being pretty darn good. It was a 2006 trade that brought Francisco Cordero, Kevin Mensch, and Lance Nix to the Brewers in exchange for Carlos Lee and Nelson Cruz. Now, Carlos Lee, I think, again, was a guy that we all thought was going to leave. So the Brewers trying to get something for him. Understand that. I think the Nelson Cruz one is what hurts. And even Doug Melvin, the general manager, has kind of regretted that trade. When I was looking up some of this stuff, I found an old piece from Brewers.com where Melvin says, if I look back on it, I maybe could have made that deal without throwing Cruz in. I look back on that one, talking about that one trade. So the Carlos Lee one, that's fine. I think we all understood it at that point in time. And for what it's worth, we probably didn't know Nelson Cruz was going to go on to have the career that Nelson Cruz had. But when we look back at these trades, and that's what this is all about, when we look back at these trades, that to me, I think you got to throw it on the list at number 4. Now, number 3, more recent one. It was a draft. It was a draft day trade. 2017. The Packers having a chance to draft one TJ Watt. Decide to trade out of the first round. Get that first pick in the second round, and they draft a player by the name of Kevin King. And that is a move that is still talked about, that will still be talked about for years to come. That was Ted Thompson's final draft as Packers general manager. And that's, for some people, what he will be remembered most by is passing on TJ Watt, trading out of the first, and acquiring Kevin King with the first pick in the second round. Now, Kevin King, for what it's worth, throughout that draft process, leading up to it, Kevin King was viewed as a potential target at that spot for Green Bay. You had a 6'3" corner with some speed out there. It's rare to see a corner with those skill sets. So a lot of people had Kevin King as a later first round pick. But the fact that it was TJ Watt So first of all, it upset a lot of fans because, one, he's a Badger. But now you look at the career that TJ Watt has had, and you're like, oh, what a miss. What a miss by a lot of teams, but what a miss by Green Bay for sure. And now when we look back at it, that trade, yuck. My number 2 is one that has a lot of people have already mentioned here too, but my second worst trade of all time. And there's other players involved in this, but the main players in this, the Bucs trading Ray Allen for Gary Payton. I still remember that day. Coming home from school, connecting to the internet on my compact computer, dial-up internet. And then it was always a routine for me, logging on to Yahoo Sports. I don't know why it was Yahoo Sports, but it was always sports.yahoo.com. Boom, enter, and it was right on the homepage. Because, I didn't have cell phone updates and all that Twitter, social media back then, so this was like, oh, whoa, okay. George Karl, I guess, really wanted to bring back his old point guard and Gary Payton. I mean, I still remember, like, at that point, they were like, what? Huh? And to this day, it's still talked about. It's still talked about. So, easily, one of the worst trades in Wisconsin sports history. Again, you had Desmond Mason coming in over too, I understand, but the main players on this one was Gary Payton and Ray Allen. You're moving on from one of your franchise's best players of all time, one of the best sharpshooters of all time, one of the best three-point shooters of all time, and you're bringing in an aging point guard, Gary Payton, who did not want to be there. Did not want to be there. But my worst trade of all time, number 1, only one person I've seen so far mention it, is the John Hadl trade. 1974. The Green Bay Packers trading for a quarterback, John Hadl. First of all, maybe the best, one of the best looking quarterbacks of all time out there. If you don't know what he looks like, I mean, come on now. You know it. But Packers gave up their first, second, and third round picks in 1975, plus their first and second round picks in 1976, and they included 2 players in the draft too, or 2 players on the roster for John Hadl. This to me is the worst trade in Wisconsin sports history. When you look at what Green Bay gave up for him, 1974 to 1975. I mean, he was coming off 1973 all-pro season and such. But it did not work out in Green Bay. He had, looking at that season, 1974, combined, threw for 1,752 yards. And that's, let me double check this because I don't think that number's accurate over here, but anybody, even if you weren't around, you probably know the name John Hadl, and you probably know the story, and you probably know the lore surrounding it, right? And just how awful of a trade that was for the Packers. So 1934, he played in 6 games, played 8, had a 3-3 record, threw for 1,072 yards, 3 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. 1975, played in 14 games, started 13 of those, went 4-9, 6 touchdowns, 21 interceptions. And then he finished up his career with Houston for 2 years. But when Green Bay traded all of those picks for him, he was already 34 years old. And he looked like 70, for crying out loud. So to me, the worst trade of all time is the Packers acquiring John Hadl. Now, I'm sure we missed some. So if we've missed some, send those on over. Hit me up with a text, 715-830-1912. But again, to revisit, my worst or my best trades in Wisconsin sports history. Honorable mention, the Big O, Oscar Robertson. Number 5, Drew Holiday. Number 4, Don Sutton. Number 3, getting Raleigh Fingers, Ted Simmons, Pete Vukovich. Number 2, CeCe Sabathia. Number 1, Brett Favre. My worst ones, Josh Hader. Number 5, Carlos Lee and Nelson Cruz. Number 3, the 2017 draft trade of bypassing TJ and getting Kevin King. Number 2, Ray Allen, Gary Payton. Number 1, John Adel. John Adel. I do have to add one more honorable mention to this, and I'll admit I forgot about it when we first talked about it on the radio show, but we got to throw Christian Yelich's trade to the Brewers in this thing. I mean, you want to talk about a shockwave. It was the Lorenzo Cain signing, and then all of a sudden, Christian Yelich was traded. You had Brewers fans thinking World Series, so got to throw that one in there, Christian Yelich being traded to the Brewers. Speaking of trades, let's talk about a potential trade for Green Bay. So I posted this question last night just because I knew this would spark a debate and such and get some peeps talking, but, you know, the whole Myles Garrett thing. So I posted up on social, what do you think, you know, would you do kind of a proposal, a hypothetical trade that was thrown out there, 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett? Yay or nay on that scenario, okay? That scenario between those two. Don't alter it and such. So Jake says in a heartbeat, what first-round pick for the Packers has been as impactful as this would be. Jamie says, absolutely. Our first-round picks usually suck, and they are later first-round picks. Then you've got... I liked Ben's comment on our Facebook page. What will happen is everyone will say the Packers will never give up that much for a player like that, and a team like Denver will get him for a second and a fourth, and we will all say, why wouldn't we give that up for him? Couple more tweets out there. We get Bruce said, absolutely, go get it. Sven says, yes, no questions, Reggie White-esque. Reggie White-esque. I had to look it up. How old was Reggie White when he signed with Green Bay? He was actually in his 30s. 32? Was he 32? Early 30s when he signed for Green Bay. So, I mean, he wasn't in his 20s when he came over and such. I had to double-check that just to make sure. So, but revisit the question here. So, the news yesterday. That Myles Garrett. So, okay, let me back up here just a sec. So, Myles Garrett yesterday released a statement saying that he wanted out. He wanted out. Wants to be traded from the Cleveland Browns. Wants out. And now you've got fan bases that are all out there saying, let's go get him. Let's go get him. Let's go get him now. And I get it. He's a premier talent over there, and he would help a lot of people. He would help a lot of people out there improve their roster, especially Super Bowl contending teams. And that's what Myles Garrett apparently wants to go to. Here's what his full... Well, let me see if I can bring it up because this computer's got to be all flipping weird right now. But he wants to go to a Super Bowl contender. That's part of what his statement said. That he wants to go play for a Super Bowl contender. As a kid, dreaming of the NFL, all I focused on was the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl, and that goal fuels me today more than ever. My love for the community of Northeast Ohio and the incredible fan base of the Cleveland Browns has made this one of the toughest decisions of my life. These past 8 years have shaped me into the man that I am today. While I loved calling this city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stages won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to go from Cleveland to Canton. It has always been to compete for and win a Super Bowl. With that in mind, I have requested to be traded from the Cleveland Browns. So you've got odds, Vegas odds on where he's going to go, and I think Commanders, the latest Vegas odds were the top ones out there. The Lions have been thrown out there. I've seen, 49ers, Cardinals, Bears, Chargers, Atlanta, bunch of teams. A lot of teams could use Myles Garrett. I think the one, though, that I think a lot of us don't want to probably see is, well, within the division for one, but also there's even the Eagles are being thrown out there and such. So, but Green Bay's name is being thrown out there too. Green Bay is being thrown out there as a possibility because, you look at the defense and what was perhaps one of the biggest weaknesses, not only of this defense, but of the team overall, and it was the pass rush, it was the front four. Well, you've got Myles Garrett maybe potentially open. Now, I should say that the Browns said they're not going to trade him, although now I think we're into this game now where Myles Garrett has put it out there publicly. He has publicly thrown out that he wants to be out. So that makes things a little bit more difficult. I don't know if a holdout situation could be in the works and such, but this isn't going to be resolved anytime soon. So maybe possibly by the draft would probably be a deadline, I would think, because if the Browns would want a first-round pick this year and such, they'd want to get that done before the draft, but it's not going to be done in a matter of the next couple days and such. But I'm sure Cleveland is getting a ton of phone calls right now. And maybe one of those would be Brian Gutekunst, Packers general manager, who said in his season-ending presser that it's time to compete for championships. It's time to compete for world championships. And they've talked about Matt LaFleur and such have talked about the need to get after the quarterback with a four-man rush. So you've got one of the best pass rushers who says he wants out, wants to be traded, and he wants to go to a contending team. Would you be willing to give up 2 first-round picks? Now, I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but as a refresher, if this is what it cost the Bears to get Khalil Mack. Just a refresher. Not saying this is going to be the same. Khalil was 2 years younger. But I throw this out there because if Green Bay truly was, and by numerous reports, Green Bay was in on Khalil Mack to the point that I remember Randall Cobb saying they went to bed thinking they had Khalil Mack, and then the next morning he was with the Bears. And there was, I think it was Gruden or others said that they took the Bears offer because they thought the Packers would have, they would be drafting later and the Bears would be drafting higher, and that didn't work out. So I only bring this up because if Green Bay truly was that close to getting Khalil Mack, this is what they would have had to have given up to get Khalil Mack. Because this is what the Bears gave the Raiders for Khalil Mack. 2 first-round picks, a 3rd-round pick, and a 6th-round pick. So 2 1s, a 3rd, and a 6. The Raiders, in turn, sent the Bears Khalil, a 2nd-round pick, and a conditional 5th-round pick. So it wasn't just for the player. They did get a 2nd-round pick and a conditional 5th-round pick in return. So we'll just make this simple. Would you give up 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett? If you were Brian Gutekunst, would you be comfortable giving up 2 first-round picks? Let's just kind of look at what Myles Garrett has done throughout his career. For the most part, he's been pretty darn healthy. He played 17 games last year, 16 the season prior, 16, 17, 14. 2019, he did only play 10. 2018, 16, his rookie year. In 2017, he played 11. He's coming off of another double-digit sack season, 14. He has had double-digit sacks every season except his rookie year when he had 7. Otherwise, it's been 13.5, 10, 12, 16, 16, 14, 14. So he will be 30. He's going to be a couple years older than what Khalil Mack would have been. Khalil Mack going to be available out there too. Do you go a little bit older with him and bring him on that line? But I feel like, in my opinion, First off, in my opinion, I think Goody is going to explore it. I think, for one, he's not doing his job if he's not kind of getting the gauge of what the value is right now, or at least picking up a phone or texting, the Browns and saying, what would it take? On February, what is it, February 4th? On February 4th, what is it going to take? See where it goes, see where that starting point is. Browns may sit there and say he's not available, and maybe they're going to stand pat and not trade him. Maybe that's the case. And I know the Browns' situation is incredibly difficult salary cap space-wise because, they're going to have to pay some dead money on Myles Garrett's cap. They got the whole Deshaun Watson fiasco that's going on over there. So, there is a lot of obstacles in the way. Okay? There's a lot of obstacles in the way for this to happen. I feel like if the Browns make this move, if they're forced to make this move, they might as well just kind of reset the whole thing in Cleveland. Just my opinion. They might as well just reset the whole thing. Get a new quarterback, take your dead cap hits, and let's start over here. But I feel like Goody's at least going to inquire. And what's going to happen is, at some point too, it's going to get released that Green Bay is interested, or Green Bay, Green Bay has been used as a ploy for a lot of teams to try to up the bargain, try to up the ante or the price tag of that player. But I do feel like Goody is going to at least inquire. And boy, 2 first-round picks it's a lot. Let's be real. It's a lot. We could sit here and say I would do this, and that. I don't want to get into, well, I would trade so and so for that. I don't want to I want to make it very basic here. Because the thing is, if the Browns do this, and this is the thing we got to remember, if the Browns do this, where they trade Myles Garrett, they are going to just kind of start over. So what are they going to want? They're going to want picks. They're not going to want to take on contracts. They're not going to want to take on, long-term deals or deals that come with cap hits. They're going to want to start this thing over and have draft picks. So while it would be, hey, let's trade Jair Alexander or Rashawn Gary for him, Browns probably saying thanks, but no thanks. For one, they don't need a corner. 2, they're not going to want to take on extra cap money when they're going to be paying off a lot of dead cap money. It's going to be picks. So while 2 first-round picks is a lot, it's a lot. But if you truly are in a win now mode, I think you have to explore it. I think you have to explore it. You look at a lot of these teams that have advanced to the Super Bowl over the years. And yes, quarterback play is a big one. But you look at a lot of these teams, what is another factor or what is another reason that they're in that Super Bowl? You look at their defensive lines. Philadelphia, defensive line. The depth over there. Jalen Carter. You talk and you look at a lot of these defensive lines for these teams, and you think about one impact defensive lineman for a lot of these teams. The Chiefs, Chris Jones. San Francisco, Bosa. Rams, when it was Rams in Cincinnati, some dude named Aaron Donald. When Tampa Bay beat Kansas City, it was Tampa Bay's defensive front that was just wreaking havoc on a depleted offensive line against Patrick Mahomes. You look at a lot of these teams that have gone to the Super Bowl in recent history. Quarterbacks are huge. There's no question. But it's been defensive front and an impact guy in the trenches on the defensive line. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm not ready to say a Kenny Clark or Rashawn Gary's at those levels. They haven't proven it enough for me. They haven't done that. So I feel like if you are seriously in a win now mode, you have to seriously consider it. You want to send a message. If you want to go up to the mic and you want to say, okay, it's time for us to compete for championships, this may be a way. Because I guarantee you, Howie Roseman from the Eagles, he'd explore this. I mean, for crying out loud, he sent He sent a first-round pick for A.J. Brown. Is it a risk? Sure, it's a risk. All trades are risks. But how many times have we, as Packers fans, always said, "Man, I wish they would just be aggressive in one move," or "Man, I wish." But then when it comes to play, when there's potentially an option, like, that's a little too rich. Well, sometimes you got to gamble a little bit. And I think for a guy like Myles Garrett, you know what you're getting. I think that's the biggest thing is like you know what you're getting when you're getting Myles Garrett. You know the type of player. You know the level of that player. You know what you're getting. Of course, I wouldn't want to, if I could get away with sending a first-round pick and a later pick, oh, yeah, absolutely. But if it's going to take 2 first-rounders, which I still I don't know if it would cost, because I think, with Garrett going out there and publicly saying he wants to be traded, I think that actually kind of takes a hit maybe in the value because, now teams are going to say, hey, this guy's not going to play for you anymore. So your asking price is a little too steep right now. I mean, Cleveland's got to do what they got to do, and they're going to ask for, for the full barn, for the full house of it. But I'll tell you what, I'd be tempted to do it. I know 2 first-round picks is a lot, but, man, at least you know what you're getting. You know what you're going to be getting. And I know a couple people said it'd be Reggie White-esque to bring him on and such. And, if it turned into that, I mean, if it turned into a few years of play like that, and that's high praise to put it on a Reggie White kind of pedestal, but if it turned into a play like that, I mean, isn't it worth it at that point? So yeah, I for sure would be tempted. Let's just imagine this current defense with Myles Garrett on there. Okay, Myles Garrett, Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Rashawn Gary, your front 4. How much better would you feel about that defensive front going into 2025? Going up against these teams in this division. Detroit, Minnesota, Chicago now with Ben Johnson. I think you just look at the division overall and you got to up the ante here a little bit, and I think you got to be a little bit more aggressive in a lot of these moves if you seriously want to compete for championships. On paper, that thing looks really impressive to me. And the thing is, it's like Myles Garrett draws a lot of tension himself already, and it's like the dude's still getting his own. He's still eating. He's still getting sacks and that. I would imagine putting him on the line is going to do, you would think, wonders for the other guys because so much attention is going to be drawn to him. But, I'm usually one that's like, I would balk at 2 first-round picks too, but boy, to get a proven commodity like that in the area of biggest weakness or one of the biggest weaknesses right now, I'd seriously consider it. I definitely would seriously consider that. And yeah, I know, some people have used they're later first round picks anyways. It's not like they're top 10 picks. Yeah. This year at least it's, in the 20s and such. That's not to say they can't find an impact player at that point. Other teams have, but as a lot of people said too, you look at how Green Bay has utilized their first-round picks before. It's been raw players or players with potentially higher ceilings and maybe not ready to play right away. So if Goody really believes now is the time to win championships, does that mean he's got a window in mind? That he looks at this and like, okay, the window's the next few years. If the window's the next few years, maybe you do make that. All right, let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about the Pro Football Hall of Fame. this weekend, obviously, all the attention's on the game itself, Super Bowl. We'll also know Saturday, MVP, and all those different awards. But something that I think gets swept under the rug a little bit is we're going to find out who's the new members of the Hall of Fame. And the big name in there is going to be, is Eli going to get in, which I think Eli is going to get in this weekend. Other modern era candidates, you got Jared Allen's finalists again, Antonio Gates, Luke Kuechly. It's going to be interesting to see Luke Kuechly, what the vote looks like for him. Guy again who called his career a little bit shorter. He went through some concussions and such, so ended up calling his career. Terrell Suggs, he's up there too. So I mean, you've got some Marshall Yanda, one of the better guards, tackles in the 2000s. So that's not all your modern era ones, but those are just some of the big names. I mean, Steve Smith Sr. on there, who I think should be in there and will eventually be in there. We'll see if it's going to be this weekend and such. But also you've got, so they got the selection committee can select up to 5 modern era players of those players, like the Eli's and the Adam Vinatieri's, et cetera, et cetera. There's 5 other total people that are up for nomination. Senior category finalists, Jim Trier, Maxie Bond, and Sterling Sharpe. 1 coach finalist, Mike Holmgren. 1 contributor finalist, Ralph Hay. Now, what's different is of those 5, from the senior category finalists, the coach, and the contributor, only 3 of those 5 can get in, and they need 80% of the vote. So it's a little bit different, because back then, when if you were a senior finalist, it pretty much was a guaranteed that you were going to get in. It pretty much was. And if you were a coach contributor finalist, you were pretty much going to get in. But now they've combined those two, and now saying a max of 3, which makes it harder for these senior finalists, these coaches, and these contributors to get into the Hall. It's going to make it a little bit more difficult for these guys. With that being said, there is no reason. You can call me a homer if you want. I don't care. I just look at the numbers and I look at the facts. There is no reason why Mike Holmgren and Sterling Sharpe should not be in the Hall of Fame. Let's start with Sterling Sharpe. So what I think has helped Sterling Sharpe finally get to this point where he could finally get his name called. What I think has helped Sterling Sharpe is, over the years, we have seen a trend, a move, a shift in philosophy amongst the voters, that it's okay to induct somebody who maybe didn't have a long career in the NFL. You had Gale Sayers a long time ago, but then it was always kind of like a narrative, well, he didn't play long enough. Then you had Terrell Davis get in. You had Tony Baselli get in. You kind of started to see this shift in thoughts in the process. Like, okay, finally it's to a point where, like, okay, that guy was just really good. Yeah, he had a short career, but injuries. Like, to me, in my opinion, I don't think you can discredit somebody, a player, if their career was ended because of an injury. If it wasn't that player's choice, and then you got Patrick Willis too. Patrick Willis, he played 7 years. He just got in the Hall of Fame last year. Again, short career. So this has helped guys like Sterling Sharpe get to this point now, to where they're on the brink of getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And it's about time, because as we Packers fans know, for some of us who got to watch him and remember watching him, dude was flipping awesome. And in an era where you had a ton of good receivers and a lot of current Hall of Fame receivers. I mean, for my money, I love 90s NFL. I love a lot of stuff, 90s NBA, 90s NFL, But, I mean, you look at some of the wide receivers that came through 80s, 90s. Obviously, Jerry Rice is the big one. Andre Reed's a Hall of Famer. You had Art Monk, who's a Hall of Famer. Tim Brown's a Hall of Famer. Chris Carter's a Hall of Famer. Michael Irvin's a Hall of Famer. You know, you got all these different receivers. And Sterling Sharpe, and I think part of it, too, is if you were to be defined as a Hall of Famer, you have to be like at the best or towards the top 2, top 3, at the very best of your position for, you know, a couple years in your career, a few years in your career. You could say that with Sterling Sharpe, and you could say that when the talent pool of wide receivers was so incredibly deep, when it included guys like Rice, Irvin, Carter, Brown, Reed, all those guys. When you could say Sharpe was at the top of some of those guys, come on now. Just to go over some of the numbers, just to refresh, you know, some of the memories out there. Sharpe was a rookie in 88. That was his lowest output of receiving yards, 791. 89, he had over 1,400 receiving yards, 12 touchdown catches. AP, All-Pro, first team. 1990, over 1,100 yards receiving. 1991, 961 yards receiving. Then, 92, you finally get a quarterback. You know, finally get some quarterbacks over the 92. 108 catches, over 1,400 receiving yards, 13 touchdowns. Another AP. Also got MVP votes. 1993, 112 catches, over 1,200 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. Another All-Pro and more MVP votes. And then in his final year, 1994, over 1,100 yards receiving, 18 touchdown catches. Of his 7 years, and this is the thing that sucks for Sterling Sharpe, he never missed a game in his 7 years, and his career gets ended from a neck injury. But in the 7 years that he played, he never missed a single game. Started 16 games each season, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. In those 7 years, he had over 8,000 receiving yards, 65 touchdown catches. I mean, you think about, if you would have played a few more years with Favre, I think he has over 100 touchdown catches. He easily has over 10,000 receiving yards. Easily has that. You know, is he top 10? Top 10 is the number 10 spot's Reggie Wayne at 14,345. I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility. Sterling Sharpe was absolutely dominant. He was absolutely dominant. And he was putting up numbers. He was putting up numbers before even Favre was Favre, for crying out loud. You get MVP Favre, like 96, 97. What would his numbers look like? There's no question in my mind Sterling Sharpe is a Hall of Famer. He is one of the most talented players to have played that position. I was looking up who led the league straight up 1990 to 1999 in receiving yards. So Sharpe played 40. So he played 5 years, 1990, 91, 92, 93, 94. Okay? But who had the most receiving yards from the 90 to the 99 seasons? Jerry Rice is number one. Okay, Michael Irvin, Chris Carter, Tim Brown, your top four. Those guys played pretty much the whole decade, right? For a guy who played five seasons, he still finished 22nd with 5,920 yards in 80 games played. Everybody above him in their hundreds. Over 100 games played. You're talking Rice had 146 games. Michael Irvin, 139. Chris Carter, 156. Tim Brown, 159. All these guys were the next closest dude that's above Sharpe in the fewest amount of games. You got to go. Jake Reed's got 118, and he had 6,124 yards. Sterling Sharpe had 5,920 and just 80. In those 5 years in the 90s, he averaged 74 yards a game. 74 yards a game. If we did just yards per game, that would be the fourth highest, behind Jerry Rice, Michael Irvin, Isaac Bruce. That's it. That's it. Sterling Sharpe was one of the most dominant players in that 7-year span, and he 100% deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Holmgren. So let's look at Mike Holmgren and some of the where he compares to some of the other. Like, for me, one of the most confusing things when it's come to inducting coaches into the Hall of Fame has been how they've inducted coaches over the years. Because I think you can make a case that some guys got in before Holmgren, that Holmgren and maybe a couple other coaches on this list should have been in beforehand. So Mike Holmgren is 21st in all-time wins. By the way, just a little bit of a side note, if Mike McCarthy does get another head coaching job next year, there's a very real chance he's going to crack the top 10 for most wins of all time in the NFL. He's currently 13th at 174. Number 10 is Dan Reeves at 190. He's not that far off. Anyways, he's got more wins than Bill Parcells. He's got more wins than Bill Parcells in less amount of time. I'm getting sidetracked here. Anyways, so Mike Holmgren's 21st with 161 career wins. You can look at some of these and, some of the guys that are in the Hall of Fame ahead of him that have fewer wins. Tony Dungy. Tony Dungy coached for 13 years. Mike Holmgren coached for 17. Bill Cowher. This is the one that I have a little bit more of an issue with, if you will. That Bill Cowher got in years ahead of Mike Holmgren. Bill Cowher coached 15 years, 149 wins. He has the advantage in win percentage, 623 compared to Mike Holmgren's 592. Same amount of Super Bowl wins. Not the same amount of appearances. Mike's been to 3 of them. So, you can go through this list, and, Dick Vermeil's on there with 15 years and 120 wins. He's got a 524 winning percentage. But I think you can't just look at numbers when it comes to Mike Holmgren and say, okay, are these Hall of Fame numbers? I know that's a big thing. It's a big thing, but I think you have to look at the bigger picture when it comes to a guy like Mike Holmgren. And there's a few things that stand out. One, you look at the franchises he's went to and the complete turnaround that he has done with those franchises. He comes to Green Bay. To me, he's on that list, the top 5, top 4 of people who are directly responsible for changing the fortunes of the Green Bay Packers franchise. You look at the development of Brett Favre, how he's developed with quarterbacks, how he's worked with quarterbacks. Brett Favre, if you want to throw in Matt Hasselbeck, throw in Matt Hasselbeck. Look what he did when he went over to Seattle, changed the fortunes of that franchise, took them to a Super Bowl. You look at just the impact that he has made with other coaches across the league. He's Andy Reid's a limb from that Mike Holmgren tree. All these other coaches that have had are from the Mike Holmgren tree. Everybody can kind of picture that, probably one staff photo out there, right? Of him, Mariucci, Reid, Dick Duran, Gruden. The impact that he's had on the game of football from mentoring other coaches and having other coaches. There's so many other stuff that, when it comes to Mike Holmgren, that you look at what he has done for the game of football. And the other thing is, can you tell the history of the game of football? Can you tell the whole story of the game of football without mentioning this player or this person? And I don't think you can without Mike Holmgren because of what he did, especially during his time in Green Bay and what he did in the development of guys like Favre and changing the course for a franchise like Seattle. If you tell the complete in-depth story of the NFL, you can't tell it without the impact that Mike Holmgren has had on players and other coaches across the league. Knock him for his general manager and executive stuff. That's fine. But that's not why he's a nominee for the Hall of Fame. He's a nominee for the Hall of Fame for being a coach. And for me, he absolutely deserves to be in there. Again, you could call me a homer, but I look at the whole picture, and I look at outside the wins and the losses in that, and the impact that he has made on the game of football, and dang, that guy should already been in the Hall of Fame. Him and Sharpe absolutely deserve to get in, and I hope they get in. It's going to get tougher for these guys. I think there's other coaches that should be in there. I think a guy like Mike Shanahan should be in there. He's got 2 titles. He's not in there. Tom Coughlin's got 2 titles. That's why it's going to be harder. Like the fact that Holmgren is a finalist, the lone finalist. You can only have one coach finalist. The fact that he's a finalist over Shanahan and Coughlin. This has got to be a shot. This might be, I don't want to say the only shot, but this is a shot for Holmgren to finally get in, because I do feel like ultimately Shanahan's going to get in, and I do feel like Tom Coughlin's going to get in. But can Holmgren, since he's the only finalist, can he get in before those guys? And there's going to be other ones, I mean, when their careers are all said and done and such, that, I mean, obviously Belichick's going to be in at some point in a couple of years and that, but all right, that is going to do it for us on this episode of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by our good friends from Hy-Vee. As a favor, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Man Cave Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, like Apple and Spotify. Also available on YouTube. And don't forget to leave me a voicemail on our phone number. All right, that number is in the podcast description. Questions, comments, thoughts, topic ideas, whatever. I'm going to play it on an episode of the podcast, so make it a good one, all right? But hit me up over there. Until next time, I'm Dan Casper, and a big thanks again to listening to the Man Cave Podcast.